Sophia had always believed that the world existed to cater to her needs. Born into a life of privilege, she had never been taught the value of boundaries, both physical and personal. To her, the concept of respecting others' property or time was foreign. If she wanted something, she simply took it. Her small suburban town had always been a haven of quiet comfort, a place where she could drive through neighborhoods, walk into stores, and interact with people as if everything was hers for the taking. When Sophia noticed a piece of land on the outskirts of town, it seemed like the perfect addition to her daily routine. The land had been owned by a man named Daniel for as long as anyone in the town could remember. Daniel was a quiet, reserved individual who spent most of his days tending to his property. He kept to himself, tending to his garden and building things with his own hands. Sophia, on the other hand, wasn't interested in Daniel's life. She had no reason to care about who lived there or what they were doing. It wasn't until she saw him out working on his property that her curiosity was piqued. Sophia had noticed Daniel working on his land before, mowing his lawn, planting flowers, fixing fences, but on this particular day, she was determined to explore. She was in the mood for an adventure and wanted to see if she could get closer to his land without him noticing. She had no real reason for wanting to trespass, but in her mind, if she saw something she liked, it would become hers. There was something about the way Daniel was building the fence that intrigued her. It looked strong, solid, and impenetrable, a challenge she felt she could overcome. Daniel, however, wasn't unaware of Sophia's tendency to cross lines. For weeks, he had been noticing her watching him from afar, and it became clear that she wasn't just admiring his work from a distance. Sophia's behavior had grown increasingly invasive, and he knew it was only a matter of time before she crossed a line that would force him to take action. Daniel had grown tired of the constant interruptions, the feeling of being watched, and the lack of respect she showed for the privacy of his land. And so, on this particular day, he made the decision to build a fence, a physical barrier to protect his peace and mark the boundaries of his property. With his tools in hand, Daniel began the task of building a sturdy wooden fence, one that would keep out anyone who had no respect for his space. It wasn't an easy task, but it was necessary. Every post he drove into the ground was a statement, his land, his rules. Sophia, however, was oblivious to the significance of the fence. In her mind, it was just another obstacle to overcome, one she was determined to conquer. As Daniel continued to work diligently, hammering each post into the ground, he didn't notice Sophia's approach at first. She was walking slowly, her steps light but purposeful. Sophia was used to getting what she wanted, and in her mind, there was no reason why this fence should stop her from exploring the land she had been eyeing for days. Her arrogance fueled her decision to cross the property line without a second thought. She stepped carefully, keeping her eyes on Daniel's back as he bent over to secure another wooden post. Sophia believed she could sneak by unnoticed, but Daniel wasn't blind. As soon as she got close enough, he turned to see her standing just beyond the line he had drawn. Without hesitation, he stood up straight, wiped his hands on his work pants, and looked her square in the eye. "Ma'am, this is private property," Daniel said firmly, his voice calm but commanding. "I'd appreciate it if you stayed off." Sophia, caught off guard by his sudden attention, raised an eyebrow. She let out a short laugh, trying to brush off the seriousness in his voice. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "This is a public area. I can go wherever I please." Daniel's patience began to wear thin, but he remained composed. "No, it's not. I've been building this fence to mark the boundary. You can't be here." Sophia smirked, dismissing his words. To her, his insistence was a mere formality, something a man like him would say out of some misplaced sense of authority. She had never been told no in such a direct way, and she wasn't about to back down now. Her eyes narrowed as she took a few steps closer, as though daring him to stop her. "Are you trying to tell me what to do?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I don't think you have the right to keep me out. I can be here if I want to." Daniel didn't flinch. He had seen this kind of attitude before, and he knew that confrontation was inevitable. His calm demeanor remained unshaken as he took a step forward, positioning himself between Sophia and the fence. "This land is mine. I'm asking you to leave." But Sophia wasn't interested in listening. In her eyes, Daniel's calm was a sign of weakness, and it only fueled her sense of entitlement. "You think you can intimidate me with your little fence? It's just wood. And I'm not afraid of you, she said with a defiant laugh. Daniel held her gaze for a moment before responding. I'm not trying to intimidate you, Sophia. I'm just asking you to respect my property. Sophia's face reddened with anger. Her sense of control was slipping, and it frustrated her. She wasn't used to being challenged, let alone by someone like Daniel. Her voice rose in volume as she taunted him. I'll do whatever I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. Who do you think you are, telling me what to do? Daniel's response was calm but firm. I'm the one who built this fence to stop people like you from trespassing. Now, I'm asking you to leave. It's not up for debate. The tension in the air was thick. Sophia stood frozen for a moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. She had underestimated Daniel, and now she was being forced to confront the consequences of her actions. But she wasn't about to back down. With a smug expression, she refused to move, hoping that somehow Daniel would back down first. Daniel's patience was running out, and it was clear that the situation was about to escalate. But Sophia was already bracing herself for the next step, determined to make this confrontation something she could control, even if it meant taking things to the next level. As the confrontation between Daniel and Sophia escalated, Sophia's sense of control slipped away, replaced by pure frustration and a need to regain authority over the situation. Her face flushed with anger, and her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she deemed to be beneath her. And in that moment, she decided to take drastic action. Without a second thought, Sophia dialed 911, her fingers moving quickly as she clutched the phone to her ear. The dispatcher's calm voice on the other end only fueled her agitation. 911, what's your emergency? Sophia's voice was shaky at first, but her fury soon took over. Yes, I'm being harassed by a man on my property. He's refusing to let me leave, and I feel threatened. He's just standing there, blocking me, and he won't let me go. She exaggerated the situation with every word, painting Daniel as an aggressor despite the fact that he had done nothing but try to assert his boundaries. Sophia continued. I've asked him to move, but he's threatening me. He's physically blocking me, and I have every right to be here. This is my land. He's the one trespassing. The dispatcher, a professional who had heard countless calls of this nature, remained calm. Ma'am, where exactly are you? Can you give me the address? Sophia, still fuming, rattled off the details. She had no idea that the land Daniel owned was private, but she convinced herself that it was simply a misunderstanding. After all, she had walked through these streets countless times, never once being told to stay away. She couldn't fathom that the fence Daniel was building was intended to protect his property from people like her. I've been here before, she insisted. I'm just trying to walk around, and he's blocking me like I'm some kind of criminal. He's a big man, and he's intimidating me. You need to send someone right now. I feel unsafe. He's just standing there, staring at me. Sophia's rhetoric grew more heated with each passing moment as she waited for the authorities. She continued to escalate the situation, raising her voice and shouting at Daniel from across the property. You don't belong here. You need to leave. Go back to wherever you came from. It wasn't just words anymore. Sophia's hostility had turned personal. Her racial bias reared its ugly head as she shouted, What? You think you're some kind of king of this land? You're just an ape. The slur slipped out so easily, her pent-up rage finding a toxic outlet. It was the kind of insult that left no room for dignity or respect, and it only further fueled Daniel's resolve to stand his ground. In her mind, Sophia thought she was gaining the upper hand. She had called the police, and in her world, that meant she would soon have all the power on her side. But in reality, the situation was far from what she believed it to be. Sophia was digging herself into a hole that would soon be impossible to escape from, not realizing that her words and actions were sealing her fate. While she waited for the police to arrive, Sophia continued to pace around, muttering to herself and cursing Daniel under her breath. She had no idea how much worse this would get for her, nor how quickly she would lose control of everything she thought she could command. When the police arrived, they were expecting the usual call, a minor dispute between neighbors, possibly some raised voices, and a misunderstanding that could be easily resolved. They pulled up slowly in their patrol car, ready to mediate the situation. Sophia, standing with her arms crossed, saw the officers approach and immediately stepped toward them, her confidence momentarily restored. As they got out of the car, Sophia wasted no time in starting her version of the story. "Officers, thank you for coming," she began, her tone dripping with false politeness. "This man," she pointed toward Daniel with a flick of her hand, "has been harassing me. I was just walking by, and he started blocking me from leaving. I've asked him to get out of my way, and he won't. He's physically intimidating me." The officers listened patiently but exchanged glances, sensing something wasn't quite adding up. They turned their attention to Daniel, who remained calm and composed despite the tension. "Sir," one of the officers addressed him, "can you tell us what happened here?" Daniel calmly recounted his side of the story. "I'm just trying to build a fence on my property," he explained. "She's trespassing. I asked her to leave, and she refused. I'm not trying to intimidate anyone. I just want to finish my work and have some peace." Sophia, clearly agitated by the officer's focus on Daniel, interjected, "He's lying. He's the one making me feel unsafe." But the officers weren't buying it. They walked over to where the fence had been erected, inspecting the boundaries. After a brief look around, they confirmed that Daniel's fence was indeed marking the property line, and Sophia had been on his land without permission. It was clear that she had no right to be there, no matter how strongly she felt otherwise. The officers then asked Sophia for her identification. It was a simple request, one that should have been routine, but Sophia's demeanor quickly changed. The confidence she had once displayed was now replaced by a growing unease. Her eyes widened as she reached into her purse and fumbled for her ID, her fingers trembling. The reality of the situation was sinking in. The officers weren't there to take her side. They were there to deal with a situation she had created. I don't understand," she stammered, trying to collect herself. "This is all a mistake. I just thought he was being unreasonable. I wasn't doing anything wrong." The officers remained stoic, taking down her details as they observed her behavior closely. They could see she was becoming flustered, and as the pieces of the situation fell into place, Sophia's facade of innocence crumbled. She had called 911 with a story that was far from the truth, and now it was clear that she had lied to authorities and made a false report. As they finished processing her information, one of the officers turned to Sophia with a serious expression. "Ma'am, you're being cited for trespassing. You'll also be facing charges for making a false report to law enforcement." Sophia stood frozen, her face flushed with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The shock of realizing she was in the wrong, and that she would face consequences for her actions, was overwhelming. As the officer spoke to her about the potential legal ramifications of her behavior, Sophia's reality came crashing down, leaving her speechless. The power she had once thought she held in this situation had evaporated, and now there was nothing left for her to do but face the consequences of her own making. As the officers continued their investigation, the truth of Sophia's actions became undeniable. She had lied about the situation, manipulated the facts, and worst of all, had attempted to use the law as a weapon against Daniel in a petty and malicious way. Sophia's arrogance and entitlement had led her to believe she could control the narrative and walk away scot-free, but the officers weren't buying her version of events. With one final glance at her, the officers moved in to arrest Sophia. "Ma'am," one of the officers said sternly, "you're being placed under arrest for making a false report to law enforcement and for trespassing." Sophia's reaction was immediate, a mix of disbelief and anger. She took a step back, her hands rising in a defensive gesture as though trying to fight off the handcuffs that were about to restrain her. "Wait, what?" she stammered, her voice rising with panic. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm the victim here." She tried to plead with the officers, her words tumbling out in a frantic jumble. "He's the one who started all this. I was just walking, just trying to go about my day. He's the one who's harassing me." But her words fell on deaf ears. The officers, unmoved by her protests, stepped forward and expertly cuffed her wrists behind her back. As the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked into place, Sophia's face twisted with humiliation. Her shoulders hunched in frustration, and for a moment, she stood frozen in shock. This wasn't supposed to happen to her. She had always been the one who held power in any situation, the one who could command attention. And now, here she was, the one being escorted away, not the one doing the commanding. Sophia tried once more to blame Daniel for everything. He's the one who's the problem. He's the one who started all of this. "You don't understand. He was threatening me," she yelled, but her voice wavered. She could feel the eyes of the officers, the onlookers, all of them watching her fall from grace. As they walked her toward the squad car, Sophia's eyes darted around, hoping for a miracle that would save her from the shame of this moment. But no one came to her aid. Instead, the crowd that had gathered to witness the incident murmured amongst themselves, some with raised eyebrows, others with expressions of disbelief. This wasn't the woman they had known, someone entitled, someone who thought she could manipulate the system. This was a woman who had just been caught in the act, her arrogance exposed for all to see. Sophia's resistance was futile, and she found herself shoved into the back of the squad car, her protest growing weaker as the officers slammed the door behind her. The humiliation of the moment settled in, and she was left alone with her thoughts, trying to make sense of how everything had unraveled. Her entitlement had been her downfall, and now her fate was in the hands of the very system she had tried to manipulate. The officers issued a citation for her actions, noting both the false report to law enforcement and her trespassing. As they processed her in the station, Sophia's mind raced. How had things spiraled so out of control? She had no answers, only the bitter taste of defeat and the knowledge that her behavior had just cost her dearly. Sophia's arrest quickly became a topic of local conversation. Word spread like wildfire about the entitled woman who had tried to manipulate the system, making false accusations and attempting to use her position to intimidate others. The incident brought to light the undercurrents of privilege, racism, and entitlement that were present in the community. People were shocked that someone with so much power, someone who had seemingly everything, would stoop so low. Daniel, though understandably upset by the entire ordeal, couldn't help but feel a sense of justice as he watched Sophia taken away in handcuffs. He had spent years building his life, working hard to maintain his privacy and his dignity, only to have someone like Sophia trample over it without a second thought. He knew that the situation wasn't just about a fence or a trespassing incident. It was about asserting his right to stand up for himself in the face of entitlement and prejudice. But despite his feelings of vindication, Daniel couldn't shake the discomfort of the whole ordeal. It was a reminder that even in a world that promised fairness, there were still people who would abuse their power and privilege. However, in this moment, justice had prevailed, and for once, Daniel felt that his voice had been heard. For Sophia, the arrest marked a pivotal moment in her life, though it was unclear if it would be one of genuine reflection or merely another chapter in her ongoing story of entitlement. After her release, she faced the fallout of her actions. The charges of trespassing and filing a false police report hung over her head, and the reputation she had carefully crafted over the years was now tarnished. Her friends and acquaintances were divided. Some defended her, claiming she had simply been caught up in a misunderstanding, but most saw her for what she truly was, a woman who thought she was above the law. Despite the public embarrassment and the legal ramifications, Sophia refused to acknowledge the deeper lessons of the situation. Instead of recognizing the impact of her behavior on Daniel and the broader community, she clung to her defiance. In interviews with the press and in private conversations, she maintained that she had done nothing wrong. "I was just standing up for myself," she claimed, dismissing the racial undertones of the entire incident as unimportant. Her public statement was a mixture of denial and self-pity, a refusal to acknowledge that she had let her privilege blind her to the consequences of her actions. Sophia's pride was too big to let her admit any fault, and that may have been the most telling sign of all, that for her, the experience had not been about growth, but about saving face. The public viewed her arrest as a cautionary tale about the misuse of authority and the dangers of unchecked privilege. It was a stark reminder that entitlement, when left unchecked, could lead to destructive outcomes for everyone involved. For Daniel, it was a validation of his fight for fairness. But for Sophia, it was simply another chapter in her history, one where she could either choose to learn from the mistakes she made or remain stubbornly anchored in her refusal to change. Only time would tell if she would truly confront the consequences of her actions or if she would continue down a path of self-delusion and denial.